John Reese has one of the best character arcs on TV. Period. Full stop. End of sentence. And it's because it has a set terminus. From the very beginning, you know that John Reese is gonna bite it one day. And that's okay. That's actually what makes it really, really good. I like John with, like, no asterisk. There's no, like, I liked him at the beginning, but I didn't like him at the end. And there's no, like, I like when he interacts with Shaw, but not with Harold. I don't care who John's interacting with or what he does or at what point in his story we're at. He's just the fucking best. And I've been puzzling through exactly, though, like, what makes his character arc so satisfying, and I think I narrowed it down. John Reese is one of those special characters that ends up right where he started, and somehow it's the most fulfilling character arc on Person of Interest, and honestly, one of the most fulfilling character arcs on TV. So let's talk about John Reese, Greek tragedies, and the power of cyclical storytelling. I think one of the strengths of Person of Interest is that it all feels so fucking tragic. And not tragic as in sad, tragic with a capital T, as in Greek tragedy. So here's the number one thing I want you to know about Greek tragedies, is that they're not some pessimistic, fatalistic view of humanity. They give voice to a universal human experience. They give voice to grief and suffering and sorrow. When you bring a lot of people in a room together and then you make them sad and you give them the space to be sad, you let everyone know that there's a way out of the darkness together. And that's what Greek tragedy does. At its core, that's what Person of Interest is about. It's about finding a way out of the darkness together. The protagonist of Person of Interest, John Reese, is a character right at home in a Greek tragedy. He's a man essentially trying to outrun his own life. It's so easy to compare him to Ajax, who was betrayed and humiliated by his own generals, exhausted by war, undone by fate, vengeance, violence, and hopelessness, until he takes his own life. In Person of Interest, John Reese is set up to be our Ajax. He's a man betrayed, exhausted, and undone by violence.
When you find that one person who connects you to the world, you become someone different. Someone better. When that person is taken from you, what do you become then?
We're introduced to John as a man adrift from anything that makes him want to live. Seriously, his opening line is about him feeling disconnected. And while, yes, it serves as a somewhat heavy-handed introduction to the show's central theme, connection, it also serves as a jumping-off point for John's philosophy. John is defined not by any singular upright moral standing that he has, but by the relationships that surround him, by the reflections of himself that he sees in other people. John Reese is extremely depressed and so fucking sad that he doesn't want to view himself directly. Maybe that's why he starts off his journey by picking fights with Russian mobsters. Maybe he sees something in them that he's scared he sees in himself. Or maybe they're just douchebags and he's a little punch drunk. Either way, this is a man on the edge. He is our Ajax, calling out for death to come visit him. And the great thing about Person of Interest is that everybody sees it and acknowledges it. John's core trait is that he is on the edge of losing it, and everybody knows. Detective Carter, in fact, clocks it immediately.
Of course, some other guys I knew, they'd done so many evil things. They felt like they needed the punishment. That sound more like your story?
And she also gives us a great jumping off point for John's character. He's done bad things, and he thinks of himself as a bad person because of it.
What you got down there, Carter? Angel of Death?
John is compared to an angel of death, a holy avenger, someone who does the dirty work that needs to be done. He's a mighty warrior, larger than life, like Ajax and Odysseus, but nobody sees him as just John. Isn't it fascinating that before we even know his first name, we get such a unique look into how other people view him? How other people view him and how other people perceive him is a cornerstone of John's character. Throughout the series, we hardly ever see John describe who he is using his own words. Now, don't mistake this for me saying that he never refers to himself. John obviously refers to himself, but when he does so, he uses other people's words. We see reflections of John across the series from a variety of different angles. We see how so many people view him, but we rarely see how John views himself. Harold Finch is the first person to give him a name, and it's an impersonal name anyway. It's Mr. Reese. They're not even on a first name basis. We're nearly 6 minutes into the pilot before we even get John's first name, which is the most typical first name for a white man ever. Finch lays out John's life story for us, and it's about what you'd expect for the protagonist of a show about surveillance. But it is also so insanely sad. John is suicidal. He is a man on the edge, and he is a man so desperately in need of a purpose. He's been betrayed. He's been undone by violence. He needs something to make him feel whole again. So Finch gives him a job, gives him a purpose, one that is certainly going to end badly. And for John, that's what he wants. A story with a neat end is about all he can hope for. John Reese doesn't exist. Now, before you fucking hit me with some shit like, well, of course, John Reese is a fictional TV show character, of course he doesn't exist. No, that's not what I mean at all. I mean, within the canon of Person of Interest, John Reese actually doesn't exist. Seriously.
No, you're not. The ID NCS gave you didn't pass muster, so you're nobody. Which means I get to name you.
John is an alias given to him early in his CIA career by Kara Stanton. He's named by other people. He quite literally did not name himself, and he's defined by other people. I mean, the man doesn't talk about himself that often. He actually doesn't talk a whole lot at all. And I think that's also why I like him. He's much more of a show, not tell character, and I actually really appreciate that. All of John Reese's silence and broodiness doesn't mean he's not a good and compelling character. He's just one that thankfully doesn't take up a lot of narrative space. Now, we're gonna get a little meta here to address the elephant in the room. A lot of people think that John Reese is just a generic action man who does generic action man things, and honestly, they're not wrong. Let me tell you why that's not actually a bad thing. Let's get even more meta to talk about the concept of narrative space. Within a narrative, there is a specific amount of space. There's only so much you can make your characters do and talk about within 22 hours of television. Now, obviously, a part of this narrative space is taken up by the world, by the specific factors that make the show happen. Since Person of Interest is a show somewhat based in real life, a lot of this narrative space is dedicated to the Machine and Samaritan. Also, they do mention, of course, real-world events like 9/11 to let you know exactly what sort of real-world stage we're playing on. I call this space the inevitable. This is the specific set of factors and world mechanics that make the story happen. They are the wheel on which the story goes, and you cannot stop it, and you can oh so rarely change the course. What happens will happen no matter what. So outside of this inevitable space, we have the space for characters and their actions and their decisions. Now, the exact breakdown of how this space is used isn't really important, but what you want to know is that part of it is always going to be dedicated to the number of the week. Then you have obviously our main characters, Harold and John, who are in pretty much every episode. Then you have Shaw, Carter, Fusco, who take up sort of a tertiary role, and then you have Root, who does Root things. She, as a character, interacts with both the character realm and influences the inevitable, but that is not what this is about. What I'm trying to say here, and the message I'm trying to get across, is that there's a lot of people this show needs to focus on, and there's only so much time in the day to do it. John is one of those great characters that you can learn about without taking up too much narrative space. How does that work, you ask? Other people tell us everything that we need to know about John. John Reese is best viewed through the reflections of the people around him. He's best viewed by what other people see as his best traits. It's the plot that the number of the week sets into motion that makes us see the special sides of John, like his special flair for beating up abusers, or the lengths he's willing to go to rescue one child. John is more than happy to be defined to the rest of the world as the man in the suit, somehow just appearing right when he's needed. But none of that can change that he's a loose cannon. John Reese was always going to be a man undone by violence. No matter how many happy fuzzy feelings working for Finch gives him, he will always be a man on the brink. In season 3, he has that whole long arc after Carter is gone to try and become the man in the suit again. He's trying to run away from the identity that other people have created for him, and sometimes you just can't run after all. And then in season 4, John and Root pair up for an extremely unlikely buddy cop movie that, while fun, also betrays how close John is to losing it at any given point in time. The most powerful thing about John Reese's character arc is that he dies in the end. He dies because he decides to make the ultimate sacrifice, to upload the machine and to save humanity. He dies because he's finally found his calling. He finally found his way out of the dark. But he's willing to go back into the dark so that his friends can live. John Reese, the man on the edge, finally steps off. Metaphorically, of course. In actuality, John Reese dies in a hail of bullets and an explosion. But that's also the exact way you'd expect John Reese to die. John Reese is introduced to us through violence, and he leaves us through violence. Our tragic hero meets a tragic end, and that's always how it was going to be. From the very beginning, from the very first episode, John's story had this sort of terminus, this inevitable conclusion that we were racing towards, helpless to fend it off. And that's okay. 101 episodes ago, John Reese got a purpose, but that never changed the fact that the chances of him dying old were slim to none. But that doesn't make any of John's story less satisfying. Person of Interest telling us flat out that John is gonna die at the end, at the very beginning, doesn't make it pessimistic, it doesn't make it sad, it makes it have meaning. It makes John's ending feel earned. We've been on this fantastic journey with him, and it wouldn't have felt right to end any other way. John Reese dies alone, but he meant something. He meant something to the people he saved. He meant something to the old man he played chess with in the park. He meant something to Harold and Shaw and Root. And he meant something to us. So maybe he hasn't really died at all.